Welcome to the Skeptic Zone, the podcast from Australia for science and reason.
Yes, it's the Skeptic Zone podcast episode number 917 for the 3rd of May 2026. Richard Saunders coming to you from Sydney, Australia, where the weather is getting a little bit cooler. Not as fast as I would like. I would rather be, right now, I would rather be in Calgary, Canada, taking part in the We Can Reason conference. Well, we can sort of be there a little bit. I hope to have some more reports for you next week about We Can Reason, a wonderful conference. But this week we have a fun report, a little report from a little gondola in Banff National Park, where our reporter Adrienne Hill is joined by her husband Greg with Dr. Chris Labos and Dr. Angie Matke. And this is just a informal bit of fun they had riding up the gondola through the beautiful scenery of Banff, where they talk about all sorts of things, including, as Dr. Angie says, fighting Darwin. And once again, it just gives you a little taste of what you can expect when you get together with fellow skeptics and just have a good time, which is a reminder that in July this year, here in Sydney, Australia, we have the Noticon with the Skeptic's Guide to the Universe Rogues and the Australian Skeptics. Get your tickets now. Head to skepticzone.tv and scroll down. You'll see a link to the tickets. And to remind you, even if you have a ticket already, and if you know a secondary or tertiary student who can come to Noticon and they're looking for a cheaper way to do it, there are scholarships. Head to skeptics.com.au. Right on the homepage, there's a link to scholarships. And I think they've got a pretty good chance, if they send in an entry, of being favourably considered for a big fat scholarship. Anyway, the point is, of course, that going to skeptical conventions is a lot of fun. You meet wonderful people, and I highly recommend it. And I wish I was there with you in Banff or Calgary at the moment, you folks at the We Can Reason. I'd love to see my old friends and the reporters too, of course, Adrienne Hill and Kat McLeod. Now, that story is coming up a bit later in the show, but to kick off the show, our reporter Kate Thomas with Woo Watch, or Woo of the Week. And Kate is going to be looking at nicotine myths and woo. Nicotine, surely one of the most addictive chemicals out there, as many people well know. Nicotine and quackery. A very interesting Woo Watch this week with Kate Thomas. Also in this week's episode, we have a look at the similarities and differences between Bigfoot, Bigfoots, Big Feet, and the Yowie, the Australian Yowie. Not many people know about the Yowie, overseas that is. The Yowie is, in my opinion, it's a bit of a rip-off, it's a bit of a knock-off, it's a bit of a cheap imitation of the Bigfoot. Maybe that's what people say when they see one on the walking trails in the countryside. Yowie! What was that? Then to round off the show, in the TROVE Archives, we look at a very interesting character from history, one Maurice Woodruff. Maurice Woodruff was an English clairvoyant and astrologer. And why he's important in skeptical history is he had a major influence on many high-profile people in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s. In fact, he died in 1973. He had a syndicated column that was published in many countries, including Australia. But notably, he had a big influence on the life of Peter Sellers. Peter Sellers, who died in 1980, who many of you will remember from the Pink Panther movies and many other movies, and his radio show, of course, with Spike Milligan and Harry Seacombe, and in the early days, Michael Bentine, called The Goon Show. Anyway, we're going to be looking at some of the writings and predictions and so on of Maurice Woodruff. Now, an update to the story we've been covering over the last few weeks about the Westall UFO and my endeavours to try and work out what it might be, which is an interesting task because lots of people over the last few decades have been endeavouring to find out what the object seen in the sky in 1966 by largely a group of school children and some teachers was. Recently, I've been posturing the possibility, at least, that it could have been a weather balloon, as a weather balloon was launched in the Melbourne area that morning. And putting two and two together, it was reasonable to assume that it could have been a weather balloon, given the right wind conditions. Now, I hope to talk about this probably more next week or the week after, but it seems that through investigation, we may, emphasis on the may, we may be able to eliminate the weather balloon as one of the possibilities, which would be very exciting and welcome news from a point of view of an investigation, because it's important to eliminate things as much as it is to find out what it really was. And to help us to find out what it really was, that's why it's important to eliminate things. It's like the detective eliminating possible suspects for a crime. Now, this is very new information, so until very recently, it was still reasonable to keep the weather balloon in the pool of possibilities. In fact, it would have been very unreasonable, I think the word I'm looking for would be something like irresponsible, to eliminate that before having good reason, very good reason to eliminate it. And I'm very afraid that all the witness accounts, which are varied and mixed and contradict each other, is not a good reason to particularly rule anything out or in at this stage. Especially when we consider there is an account from a witness who said the flying saucer at Westall was nothing but a deflated weather balloon. Even as a little 9-year-old, I could tell the difference. Sorry to burst your balloon, but this is the way it was. Now, on the face of it, you'd think, aha, you see, a witness saw a weather balloon. But no, we cannot simply rely on the witness accounts. As I said, they do contradict each other. It's just not a reliable way to gather information. Oh, what a rabbit hole the Westall UFO is and has been for quite a number of years. Anyway, now it's time for me to run downstairs. And thinking about my Canadian friends, I'm going to have some waffles with imitation maple syrup. Ooh, no, the skeptical fairy wouldn't like that. I'll get some real maple syrup. While I do that, I hope you enjoy the Skeptic Zone. Wacky woo that's worth watching. It's Woo Watch with Kate Thomas.
Welcome to Woo of the Week, where we take a wellness claim, hold it up to the light and ask, is this science or is it vape smoke and mirrors? And today, nicotine. Apparently, according to certain corners of the internet, and yes, people like Dr. Brian Ardis, I can barely bring myself to use that word so strongly because you all know he is and wait for it, chiropractor and not a medical doctor, just borrowing the legitimacy and trust that comes with the word. But I digress. Apparently nicotine is a reported cure for Parkinson's, dementia, myocarditis, brain fog. At this point, nicotine is being pitched less like a drug and more like a multivitamin sent from heaven. And when I hear one molecule supposedly treats neurodegeneration, heart inflammation, cognition, and fatigue, my pharmacy eyebrows go way up, which is impressive because I've had Botox. Because when one thing is claimed to do everything, that's where woo begins. Let's start with the grain of truth, because good woo always starts with a grain of truth. Nicotine is pharmacologically active, very active. It binds to nicotinic acetylcholine receptors. It can increase alertness, attention, reaction time. People feel sharper, focused, stimulated. Researchers have explored nicotinic pathways in Parkinson's, in cognition, in inflammatory signalling. That part is real. But, and this is where the wheels come off, Studying a receptor pathway is not the same thing as proving nicotine cures disease. That's like saying because caffeine affects adenosine receptors, coffee cures chronic fatigue, or glasses help you see better, therefore spectacles cure blindness. No, because a thing influences one pathway doesn't make it a cure. Clinical outcomes are evidence. They're different things, very different things. And this is classic woo move number 1. Confuse mechanism with proof. Nicotine touches dopamine pathways, therefore nicotine treats Parkinson's. That's not a bridge, that's parkour. Yes, there's long-standing scientific curiosity about nicotine and Parkinson's, but curiosity is not cure. In fact, trials looking at nicotine in Parkinson's haven't shown some magical disease-reversing effect. And yet online it gets inflated into, they don't want you to know nicotine heals the brain. Really? If nicotine broadly treated neurodegeneration, pharma wouldn't be suppressing it. They'd have patenting derivatives by Tuesday. And then there's brain fog. Can we talk about that phrase? Because brain fog is doing a lot of heavy lifting here. Brain fog is not a diagnosis. It can be sleep deprivation, perimenopause, depression, vitamin B12 deficiency, anemia, thyroid disease, long COVID, medication adverse effects, burnout, grief, parenting teenagers, who knows? So when someone says nicotine cures brain fog, my question is, which brain fog? In whom? Measured how? Compared with what? Because vague symptoms are where wellness marketing loves to live, foggy enough to project miracles into. And myocarditis, hard stop. I nearly spat out my coffee when I heard that one. Myocarditis is inflammation of the heart muscle. That is not biohacking territory. That is not try a nicotine pouch. That is not a wellness experiment. That is a medical condition. Turning serious cardiac disease into a supplement hack is not edgy. It's reckless. And let's talk about the addiction elephant in the room. Because the wellness version always says, it's not tobacco, it's nicotine, as though removing smoke turns it into a botanical adaptogen. Friends, nicotine is highly dependence-forming. That isn't controversial. That's just pharmacology. It affects reward pathways very efficiently. Raises heart rate, raises blood pressure, can drive tolerance and withdrawal. And fun fact, plants evolved nicotine partly as an insect neurotoxin. So some of the miracle molecule rhetoric is literally romanticizing a plant defense chemical. Perspective helps. Also, it ranks in terms of addiction potential right up there with cocaine, just behind heroin. This is not a lavender tea. And I notice something else happening. Biohacker culture loves rehabilitating controversial molecules, raw milk, ivermectin, psychedelics as cure-alls, now nicotine. There's always the same seductive story. What if the dangerous thing they warned you about is secretly healing? It's contrarian catnip because rebellion sells, but contrarian is not the same as correct. And can we stop doing this thing where one interesting therapeutic possibility becomes universal wellness? Morphine treats pain, doesn't make opioids a longevity stack. Steroids reduce inflammation, doesn't make prednisone a biohack. Everything in pharmacology is context. Dose, indication, risk, trade-offs. That's medicine, not magic. And honestly, this starts to look familiar. Because sometimes I think big wellness is becoming big tobacco in activewear. Same seductive marketing, same identity signaling, same they lied to you, different packaging, now with podcasts. So where do I land? Is nicotine pharmacologically interesting? Absolutely. Could nicotinic pathways matter in research? Sure. Does that mean nicotine cures Parkinson's, dementia, myocarditis, and brain fog? No. That is artisanal, premium grade, small batch biohacker woo. And this is my test for any claim like this. If one molecule is supposedly fixing neurodegeneration, cardiac inflammation, cognition, fatigue, attention, longevity, I start assuming we are not in medicine anymore. We are in mythology. And around here we ask for receipts. Human trials, clinical outcomes, harms, not receptor fan fiction. So this week's prescription. If somebody tells you nicotine heals everything, ask, where are the trials? What are the outcomes? What risks? Compared to what? Because if your miracle cure sounds like it could also have been sold at a petrol station behind a locked cupboard, maybe be skeptical. I'm Kate. This has been Woo of the Week. And remember, just because something stimulates a receptor doesn't make it a wellness routine. It just means someone has wrapped addiction in the language of healing. Follow me on Instagram, Facebook and TikTok at Prescribe or Pass. And if all this stuff, supplements, medicines, wellness claims, interactions, feels confusing and you'd like a one-on-one deep dive with me, you can book a consultation at Medication Clarity Clinic or visit medicationclarity.com.au. The most powerful position you can be in healthcare is informed. It can't just be me, but something serious is happening to my body. On the Moans is a new podcast from me, Kate Thomas, a pharmacist of 25 years and a newly minted perimenopausal oversharer. I pull back the curtains on perimenopause, hormones, rage-quitting jobs, disappearing libido, bone health, and the quiet suffering so many women carry alone. From estrogen quitting her full-time job with no notice and taking all of the neurotransmitters with her, to a friend breaking down in the kitchen whispering, "I thought it was just me." On the Moans is honest, evidence-based, funny, messy, and deeply human. And it's not just for women. Loads of men are wondering why their partner has gone from being reasonably well put together to now crying because she can't remember why she entered a room. We are not broken. It's not our fault. And we're definitely not alone in this. Join me for On the Moans, available now on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, or via the link on the Skeptic Zone homepage.
You can count on Adrienne with Adrienne Hill.
Hello everybody, this is Adrienne Hill reporting from a very interesting location in a gondola in Banff National Park. And I have some very impressive guests with me today. Who have I got here?
Angie Matke, Dr. Angie.
And?
Chris Labos.
And of course, the most important person here,
Greg Hill.
my husband.
The most important person here because he has the car keys.
That's right. Exactly. He's our chauffeur. This is a beautiful location. And how are you enjoying it so far?
Well, I got to say, going down in the gondola, we say gondola down south, but the gondola is a little more unnerving than going up.
Yeah, this is definitely not the place to be if you're afraid of heights, because we were just under 7,500 feet above sea level. It was something, I have to say. I was not fully, first time in the Rockies for me. I'm very impressed with the views, and it was a really amazing experience.
It is just beautiful. I've wanted to come for decades, and I'm so impressed. It's so beautiful.
And we've had some fascinating conversations, and I just want to imbue my inner Celestia Ward and Ben Radford and ask you, what are you skeptical of this week?
Well, I'm sort of skeptical that this cord is going to hold because it's shaking quite a bit, so I'm trying not to look at it too closely. But listen, so many people are here. I'm sure we'll be fine. But yeah,
Trust the engineering.
you gotta trust the engineering as you would trust the science.
Trust the science. That's exactly right. Oh, same.
There's the thing that's making me a little bit worried about this is because I'm from Greece originally. Well, not from originally. My family's from Greece. I was born in Canada, but there's a place very similar to this in Greece, Meteora, where they have those monasteries on top of those mountainous peaks. Worth going if you've never been. It's truly impressive. Now you can just drive right up to them because they've built the road. But back in the day, you had to be raised up in a basket that they would lower down a basket and haul you up. That's what the monks used to do. And so, you might say to yourself, is that safe? And the monks always assured everybody it was safe. And there was this story, maybe apocryphal, of a British visitor who went there. And he asked the monks, he's like, do you ever change the rope? Because he was a little bit worried because the rope was looking a little bit frayed. And the monk says, yes, we change it every time it breaks. And
they do the same on this gondola.
Yeah.
I don't have a good answer for that right now. My breath is taken away by the views. It's just too beautiful.
Now the question, is your breath taken away because of the beautiful views or because of high altitude sickness?
It might be a little bit of both,
Yes.
honestly.
Yeah. We are high enough up that the oxygen content might actually be having an effect on people here.
I'm definitely a sea level girl.
Yeah.
Yeah, hiking up some of those stairs, you can feel it, can't you?
Definitely can. Definitely
Did you
can.
feel it going up the stairs to the top there?
I mean, I was a little bit short of breath, to be sure. I mean, anytime you're walking upstairs, it's not going to be as easy as walking flat. But yeah, you definitely feel it at this altitude. It's not quite the same as being back on sea level.
And Greg, you found something interesting today.
I did. Well, the other day, somebody left a business card on my car at the transit park and ride. Somebody named Master Ramji. And apparently, he is pretty incredible because he is specialized, and I quote, in removing all types of negative energy, black magic, voodoo, obeah, enemy jealousy, witchcraft, batu, jadoo, tana curse, bad luck, evil things, and bad spirits.
Well, those are all words.
And
Angie said those are all words. Yes.
what's even more incredible is that he give permanent protection, quote unquote.
I have to say the most impressive thing about that is that in this era where most doctors are becoming increasingly specialized and more focused in their practice, it's nice to see that some people are still generalists out there and can deal with multiple issues across the width and breadth of medical problems. So nice to see that there's still some generalists out there and that we're not all becoming specialists.
Well, interesting you should say that because actually there's a note here that says that he's a specialist in bringing back loved ones.
So from the airport, is he bringing them back like as an Uber service? Maybe that's the sideline.
It doesn't really say.
Yeah, it doesn't specify. It could just be a car service. I mean, that's my interpretation.
Plausible
Get your loved ones
deniability.
back. Yeah.
Well, and Angie, you and I play mini golf often virtually online with Richard Saunders, and
I mostly play badly, so
as we all do,
fun, yeah, but it's
lots
fun.
of giggles, right?
Yep, absolutely.
And when you can't make it, you have a very interesting saying that you tell us to indicate that you're at work.
I usually will say that I'm fighting Darwin, by which I mean I'm attempting to keep people from removing themselves from the gene pool. Although I realize, though, that most of the time they've already reproduced, and so my efforts are for naught. But I try anyway.
We often forget that evolution is driven by pre-reproductive survival, not post-reproductive survival. So once you've had your kids, it actually doesn't really matter what happens to you anymore because you're no longer passing anything on.
That's exactly right.
And can you tell us one of those stories?
Well, we were talking earlier, and probably the most dramatic illustration was the patient who tore out his testicle and threw it across triage. So,
Which is just horrifying.
boy, I'll tell you that my favorite conversations with specialists but usually begin, "You're not going to believe this, but," and then I tell them the story. So, so that was the call to the urologist that day. "You're not going to believe this, but ...
Yeah. Unbelievable. And of course, for those of you who don't know, both Angie and Chris are medical doctors. Well, thanks so much for hanging out with me on this ride, looking at the beautiful landscapes around us. And Chris, you have a podcast, and can you tell us about that, please?
Yeah, so the podcast is called The Body of Evidence, so you can look for it online anywhere you get your podcasts, iTunes, Spotify, what have you. If you get to the Madonna movie of the same name, you've gone to the wrong place. Very different content-wise. I've never watched the movie beginning to end. One day maybe I will as a Patreon reward, we'll see. Yeah, so it's an evidence-based medical podcast that tries to be funny. I don't know if we always succeed, but we do try to be funny on a sort of regular basis.
Thanks, Chris. And how can people find you?
So my home address is 26... Yeah, if you need anything, just throw a brick through my window. No, just search for my name. Yeah, Facebook, Twitter, X now, I suppose, LinkedIn, Blue Sky. I think I'm on all the social media apps, usually some variation of Christopher Labos. And the podcast is The Body of Evidence. You just search for that and you'll find it easily enough.
Well, thanks so much. And Angie, how can people find you?
Well, you can come to Dragon Con to the Skeptic Track and see me and Derek Colanduno, and this year you'll see Celestia Ward and Ben Radford and a whole bunch of other delightful folks, and we'll be talking about cryptids and other things that we're skeptical of.
Until next time, this is Adrienne Hill from the Banff Gondola. Woohoo! Woo! Woo!
Greg is engrossed in the card.
Yeah, Greg is just fascinated by the card.
100% results guaranteed.
Well, you're guaranteed to empty your wallet.
We made it!
Yay!
Didn't break!
No, it did not break. Well done, well done.
Woohoo!
How was it, guys?
Good.
good.
Wonderful.
G'day, Dr. Carl here, letting you know that I will be appearing at Nicotine 2026 from July 23rd to the 25th at the Sydney Masonic Centre. What is a Nicotine? Well, it's not a convention, but it sort of-ish, kinda. It's an interactive festival of ideas and games and audience participation by the Australian skeptics and the whole crew from the Skeptic's Guide to the Universe, which is the #1 skeptical podcast from the USA. The tickets are selling fast, with some types having already sold out. So jump onto notaconcon.com or skeptics.com.au to find out more and book your place while you still can. Bring your brain, bring your mates, and I'll see you there. Peace, love, mung beans. Bye.
A topic we've covered on the Skeptic Zone before quite a few times are things like the Bigfoot, the Sasquatch, the abominable snowman, and so on, and its Australian cousin, the Yowie. I first became aware of the Yowie way back in the 1970s when a newspaper report at the time, and I hope I can find this newspaper report in my archives, mentioned the Yowie. And I remember thinking, even as a kid, when I saw this, I remember thinking that surely this is just a rip-off, a knockoff, a copy of the Bigfoot. And this sort of thing was spurred on by such characters as the late Rex Gilroy, who we've talked about on the Skeptic Zone before, who for decades would roam around the countryside and come back with huge plaster casts of footprints. He was very good at doing this. He was very successful, I might say. And as I wrote many years ago, somehow he got these footprints one way or another. Indeed, in my archives, there's a letter to the editor from 1973 to the Sydney Morning Herald, Australia's own abominable snowman, and it's a letter from Rex Gilroy, although he doesn't use the word Yowie at that particular time. However, another entry here in my archives comes from the citizen newspaper from Ottawa, Canada, dated 1976, and it's headed, and I think I've read this out in a trove some years ago, "Now the Yowie, ? Bigfoot has a cousin in Australian mountains." And indeed, in a magazine which is still going on today called the Australian Women's Weekly, from 1976, we have a picture of Rex Gilroy with the heading on the article here, "It's huge, hairy and," turn the page, "hides in the bush." There you go. With a artist rendition of a Yowie. In fact, it's Rex Gilroy's own rendition. And the Yowie is roughly 2 times taller than the average man, or 2.5. So it would be hard to miss. But it's true to say that few cryptids, and we all love cryptids like the Loch Ness Monster or the Chupacabra. I saw one the other week in the Australian Museum, where they had a display of vampire-like creatures, mostly insects and so on, and including some notable creatures from fiction like Dracula, Count Dracula, and the Chupacabra. And I couldn't help thinking at the time that a lot of the information there presented about the Chupacabra was courtesy of one Ben Radford. But few cryptids capture the popular imagination in North America and Australia quite like the Bigfoot/Yowie. The idea that there's a huge ape-like, human-like creature lurking around the world is quite appealing to some people. In fact, it was very appealing when I was small because it was a fascinating story. So the Bigfoot, the Sasquatch, is said to be a bipedal creature reportedly found in the Pacific Northwest, places like Washington. And I think I've even heard many reports of it being found in Northern California and things like that. In Australia, the Yowie is supposedly an equally imposing figure, skulking around the bushlands of Queensland and New South Wales. That two such similar creatures supposedly inhabit entirely different continents, separated by vast oceans and evolutionary history, is presented by believers as evidence of something genuinely mysterious. Very mysterious. Now, from a skeptical point of view, it seems, however, far more mundane. The same psychological and cultural machinery producing the same kind of story. And I can't help thinking that in the case of the Yowie, it was a little bit of jealousy from people in Australia that North America should have such an interesting cryptid. But the similarities between the two legends are striking enough to look further into the details. Both creatures are described as immensely tall, typically 2 to 3 meters tall, and covered in dark to light brown hair or fur. Both walk upright, leave oversized human-like footprints, emit foul odors, and are reliably witnessed only at a distance or in poor light. Both lurk at the edges of civilization, just beyond where the roads end. Both are said to be simultaneously elusive and ubiquitous, seen by hundreds of witnesses, yet never producing a body, a bone, a tooth, a sample of fur or hair, or a clear photograph. Now, the stories can be quite similar, people being overwhelmed by a sense of dread, feeling of being watched, strange noises in the night, rocks being thrown at tents and this sort of thing, or strange noises as if something is being cracked against a tree in the middle of the night. The North American Bigfoot legend in its more modern form was effectively born around 1958, when a California newspaper published a story about large footprints being found at a construction site in Humboldt County. The story spread rapidly. The name Bigfoot entered popular culture. Roger Patterson's famous and almost certainly faked. In fact, there's a movie coming out soon which we've been promised. They've been whetting our appetite, teasing us, called Capturing Bigfoot, and our friend Dr. Angie Matke, who you heard in the last segment, has actually seen this, and the reports of people who have seen it says it's quite damning evidence against a Bigfoot or for the film being faked. But the original film was shot on 16mm in 1967, centered on the image of a lumbering, upright ape man, just as the popular imagination would have it and would expect. From that point of view, Bigfoot became a media phenomenon, sporting books, documentaries, television specials, and really a cottage industry of dedicated Bigfoot hunters, which continues to this day. It is big business. Bigfoot even made an appearance in an episode or two of The $6 Million Man in the 1970s, and I remember watching that all those years ago. Now the Yowie. While Indigenous Australians have long held traditions of large, dangerous bush creatures, as many similar cultures would have, the term Yowie, meaning the tall, hairy, ape-like, Bigfoot-like creature, really gained significant traction only in the 1970s, precisely as Bigfoot mania was peaking in North America and finding its way into the Australian media. And we really do find the term Yowie being used as relating to a Bigfoot-like creature during the 1970s in newspapers and magazines. The mechanism might be looked at in the term of folklore. When a compelling narrative enters a community, it shapes subsequent experiences. People may well have encountered something strange or not have known what is going on, and they look for a reference, something they've heard of, something that could be what they may have experienced or heard or were unsure of, or a story that's been retold. It can hardly be surprising that some people leapt to the conclusion that a giant ape-like creature might be roaming around the bushland. So in Australia from the 1970s onward, Yowie became such a framework, in much the same way that UFO shaped how people interpret aerial anomalies after 1947. The story precedes the sighting and gives it form. It should be noted that Australia has large feral animals, wild pigs, large kangaroos, feral horses, even very large feral cats. They can get quite big, but that's a story for another day. And they can cause alarm if encountered unexpectedly and in the dark. If you're startled by glimpsing such an animal in poor light, filtered through your knowledge of Yowie lore, Bigfoot stories, that can produce a compelling and entirely sincere account of something that never existed. The Yowie, then, is probably best understood not as an independent cryptozoological mystery, but as a cultural import, a visitor, a Southern Hemisphere franchise of the Bigfoot legend. The similarities between the two creatures are not evidence that both exist. They are evidence that humans tell the same stories all over the world, and that in a connected media age, these stories travel faster than any creature possibly could. And again, we get back to the basics of cryptozoology. We say, let's assume the creature is real. If it's real, it has to have a fossil record, an evolutionary path. It has to be part of its environment. It has to have a breeding population, a gene pool. Otherwise, it simply wouldn't function as an animal. It would need to leave more recent remains, as we said before, a bone, a tooth, a chunk of hair, anything like that. And it would not be so camera shy. Oh, Rex Gilroy. I can't help thinking of the time which I've talked about before on the Skeptic Zone where I met Rex Gilroy at a psychic fair or a mystery fair or something like that, and before him on his table had many, many examples of huge plaster casts of footprints, including footprints of giant cats with paws, 2 or 3 times larger than even a lion's paw. Again, I think Rex Gilroy had a lot of fun getting these plaster casts one way or another. are Bigfoot and its Australian cousin, the Yowie.
This is Susan Gerbic from Psychics Explained. That's the YouTube channel where we discuss and analyze in great depth all those people who say that they can speak to the dead, all those readings, how they look like they're actually communicating with people. Why do people fall for this? There's a reason. It's much more complicated than you would think. Come to my channel, watch our videos. We would love to have you become part of our conversation. Just visit us on YouTube at Psychics Explained or Psychic Sex Planed on YouTube.
Now it's time once again to go back to those archives from around the world, the digital archives and archives from other resources like microfilm, microfiche, fishy film, where we find items from the past as published in newspapers and so on of interest to skeptics. And this week we're going to go back to one of the classic topics, that is psychics and astrologers, that sort of thing. And we're going to look at some of the published works by Maurice Woodruff. Who was Maurice Woodruff? Well, I first became aware of him when I saw the film from 2004 called The Life and Death of Peter Sellers, where Maurice Woodruff is played by Stephen Fry. Now, Peter Sellers was very much into superstition and occult and these sort of things, clairvoyance. And famously, he went to the Philippines to try and have himself cured by one of those scammers, the psychic surgeons. But more about Peter Sellers a bit later on. The reason we're covering Maurice Woodruff in this segment is that I've discovered bits and pieces from him as published here in Australia. But an overview. Maurice Woodruff was born in 1916 and raised in London. He was a self-proclaimed clairvoyant and astrologer who achieved considerable fame not only in England but in other parts of the world too, via newspapers, stage performances, and even television appearances. Now there's some family history of similar claims. His mother was a clairvoyant, Vera Woody Woodruff, and he later wrote a biographical account of her life entitled Woody, published in 1967. His other books included The Secrets of Fortune Telling, Your Own Future, and Probing the Unknown, The Personal Experiences of a Psychic. At the height of his fame, Woodruff's syndicated column reached over 50 million people, and he received over 5,000 letters a week asking for advice. He also racked up an impressive list of celebrity clients. In addition to his television work, Woodruff hosted the hour-long American TV program Maurice Woodruff Predicts for a short run in 1969. Woodruff died in 1973 after suffering a heart attack at the very young age of 56. Now, getting back to his influence over Peter Sellers had been drawn into the world of the paranormal earlier in his career through his friend and former member of The Goon Show, Michael Bentine, who had grown up in a household where seances and table turning were regularly practiced, and who claimed psychic abilities of his own. Michael Bentine went on to run, host, produce a very, very popular children's program called Potty Time with little puppets. But Woodruff did hold some sway over Peter Sellers, and a famous story involves the prediction that led to Sellers' marriage to Britt Eklund. Woodruff was said to have suggested to Sellers that the initials B.E. would be very significant to him, intended as a reference to director Blake Edwards, who was doing the Pink Panther series of movies. However, Sellers failed to make that connection. Returning to the Dorchester Hotel, he was struck by the sight of a beautiful young blonde woman at reception. When he asked who she was, he was told her name was Britt Eklund. Sellers recalled Woodruff's prediction and married Eklund within weeks. Now, from a skeptical point of view, Woodruff is a fascinating character from history, a figure who had enormous influence on various famous people. And with the case of Peter Sellers, it goes to show us how people who are vulnerable to this sort of thing can be very heavily influenced and become dependent on the so-called psychic predictions and so on. Woodruff released a series of records for record players in the day, and the records were called Maurice Woodruff Astrological and Clairvoyant Predictions, and you'd buy one for a certain star sign. And as a little experiment, what I'm going to do is play a little bit of one of his records, but I will bleep out the star sign or the dates. See if this applies to you.
So here are my specific astrological predictions for you as an individual born under the sign of... You born between are not given to acting on impulse. You are shy, yet at times rather fussy and given to premeditation. You born between are the most thorough types. You are super sensitive and very highly critical. You reason everything out in a thoughtful and persistent manner, and as a result meet with a great deal of success. You born between possess a reserve which leads you to less active life than others of your sign. It is you in this last group who may give way to temptations and are inclined to lead more unconventional lives morally, even though you may be quite stable in other respects.
Now, was that relevant for you? Was that your star sign? Let's hear the whole thing again, this time with the star sign and the date put back in.
So here are my specific astrological predictions for you as an individual born under the sign of Virgo. You born between August the 22nd and the end of the month are not given to acting on impulse. You are shy, yet at times rather fussy and given to premeditation. You born between September the 1st and the 10th are the most thorough types. You are super sensitive and very highly critical. You reason everything out in a thoughtful and persistent manner, and as a result meet with a great deal of success. You born between September the 11th and the 21st possess a reserve which leads you to less active life than others of your sign. It is you in this last group who may give way to temptations and are inclined to lead more unconventional lives morally, even though you may be quite stable in other respects.
Now let's look at some references to Maurice Woodruff from the newspapers, and I start with the Sunday Mirror from Australia, dated the 10th of April, 1966. A column which at the top in big print says he will resign, pointing to a picture of President Lyndon Baines Johnson. Sears tips go haywire. London, Saturday. The reputation of Britain's clairvoyant extraordinary, Mr. Maurice Woodruff, as a seer, came a bit more unstuck last week when the British Labour Party galloped back into power. He had predicted a Tory triumph at the elections. It was his second misprediction of 1966. His first was Britain's big rail strike, which he said would last 24 hours. The strike didn't happen. So his scorecard for the year now reads 2 down, 4 to go. Point. President Johnson will resign. Point. Harold Wilson will come to terms with Ian Smith of Rhodesia. Point. The Russian leader Alexei Kosygin will be replaced. Point. A horse with 5 to 7 letters in its name will win the English Derby. Well, LBJ, President Johnson, did not resign. The claim here that Harold Wilson, who was the Prime Minister, will come to terms with Ian Smith of Rhodesia. I'm noting here that there were talks held in December of 1966, and it seems it failed, or they failed to reach a compromise. And I'm getting reports here that Smith rejected the proposal. So I think we can mark that prediction as a fail. The next one, the Russian leader Alexei Kosygin will be replaced. Now, I wasn't familiar with this character. Was a Soviet statesman who served as the chairman of the Council of Ministers from 1964 to 1980. So no, he was not replaced in 1966. Let's see now. A horse with 5 to 7 letters in its name will win the English Derby. And the winner that year was a horse with 11 letters in its name, Charlottetown. Anyway, getting back to the article. A small man with a sometimes impish sense of humour, 49-year-old Woodruff is the 7th son of Vera Woodruff, a celebrated society clairvoyant of the 20s and 30s. He works with an ordinary deck of playing cards and says his predictions are based on 20% psychology, 15% intuition, 60% gift. The rest, he says, is padding. Now from the pages of the Australian Woman's Weekly, and this comes to us from 1964 on the 5th of August, and this is one of Maurice Woodruff's syndicated columns. The Stars, and You by Maurice Woodruff. Romance, but with no strings. Cliff Richard is very true to his birth sign of Libra, being well-balanced, refined, and strongly artistic. I should tell those close to him that they will always find Cliff difficult to fool. Cliff, like many Librans, has an inborn sense of intuition on which he can usually rely. I believe you will find, Cliff, that the older you get, the more your scope will expand. And of course, Sir Cliff Richard is still with us to this very day. This is true of many Librans, for as they go along, they tend to lean less on advice from others, gaining more and more confidence in their own thoughts and feelings. Cliff has great generosity and a very keen sense of knowing when to come forward and when to melt into the background. I predict that Cliff Richard's next film will be a smash hit, and he will score again in a musical stage show. I predict that romance will come his way, but I do not yet see signs of marriage. If you're Libran like Cliff, I find that you Librans are among the most likeable of people. You attract attention easily and enjoy being in the center of things. One thing I must warn you of. Because you enjoy affection, you may run the risk of lacking just that little bit of toughness which life sometimes demands. I predict that someone you respect will put you in touch with a very influential person. I predict that you may clash with a strong-minded person on a minor issue, and I advise you to have patience. More stars next week. And there's a photograph here of Cliff Richard. Cliff Richard, born October 14th, 1940, is a Libran, September 22, October 22. And Sir Cliff Richard is now 85 years old. Well, there we go. A look at the life and times and some of the writings of Maurice Woodruff. Most remembered these days, I think, because of his influence on famous people like Peter Sellers. But of course, people writing astrology columns and advice columns based on psychic insights are many, various, and to use an old phrase, they're a dime a dozen. And you too can find out about all sorts of psychics and astrology columns and predictions and all that sort of stuff when you go to Trove at trove.nla.gov.au. Type in your search. Maybe you could type in astrology and Cliff Richard, I don't know. Because you never know what you might find. Thank you for listening to the Skeptic Zone podcast this week. Thank you to those people who support the show via PayPal or Patreon at skepticzone.tv. It's because of your help that the show keeps going. Now, this week at Skeptics in the Pub, downtown Sydney at the Occidental Hotel, Thursday at 6 p.m, we have a talk by Dr. Sue Urachi about placebo. Skeptics in the Pub in Sydney has been going for over 20 years. And it's always a great night to have a drink, have a meal, and chat to other skeptics. Hope to see you there. And also, don't forget, later on next month, we have PsyCon in Buffalo, New York. And I'll be talking about that more in the next few weeks. That's a very exciting meetup this time around, celebrating 50 years of Skeptical Inquirer magazine and the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry. And just before I go, don't forget to download the podcast from our reporter Kate Thomas, On the Moans. On the Moans. And this week, in fact, I think it was just released, was part 2 of her 2-part chat with the wonderful Australian comedian and entertainer Jean Kitson. Great podcast, Kate. Well done. But for this week, this is Richard Saunders signing off from Sydney, Australia.
You've been listening to the Skeptic Zone podcast. Please visit our website at www.skepticzone.tv for episodes and show notes with links going back to 2008. You can follow the Skeptic Zone on Facebook, X, TikTok and YouTube by clicking the links at our homepage, together with links to support the show financially via Patreon or PayPal. The Skeptic Zone is an independent production. The views and opinions expressed by our guests are not necessarily those of the Skeptic Zone podcast or any other skeptical organisation.
Hello to those people who listen after the music for the dice game. This is where you get to use your psychic, magic, psychic powers or dumb luck. I use my dumb luck. I'm going to roll this die here. It's a D20. Where's my other one? I don't know, packed away somewhere. I'm going to roll a D20. I'm going to roll it 4 times. And each time you get to guess what's going to come up. Here we go. Roll number 1. I'm going to write these down beforehand. 1, I'm going to guess 20. Here we go. Here it comes. 18. Oh, well. Roll 2 coming up. I'm going to guess 16. 16. 15. I'm getting closer. So roll 3. I'll predict. Let me guess a random number from the universe for no reason. 5. I should do that more often. It's a 5. Wow. Excellent. And for the supplementary, what do you think? 3. There's a good number. Here it comes. 11. Oh, well, I got one this week. That's not too bad. This week's winning numbers, 18, 15, 5, and 11.